there right now. But if I was Mike Brown, I would be looking long and hard at trying to pull a Tampa Bay and make that change to be able to get you there. Because for whatever reason, Marvin Lewis just can't do it. And maybe if Andy Dalton was healthy, we could play the if game all day long. If. But if he was healthy, maybe they could have done it. But he'd never won a playoff game either. So I think I'm at that point, Matt, where if the right senior coach was out there, maybe that's a Tom Coughlin. I don't know. They're not going to do it, but that might be the type of guy who can come in who's won a Super Bowl and say, I'm going to take you to that next level. I think that might make some sense for Cincinnati to look into.
I absolutely think it would make sense. I love Marvin Lewis as a coach. I think Marvin Lewis has done an amazing job to make the Bengals competitive in a division that has two powerhouses.
Oh, sure.
The only problem is that he hasn't been able to get over the hump, and I think at some point that's going to wear a little thin. I think it has already worn more than thin on Bengals fans. And I said to my wife yesterday, I said, you know what, the Bengals are the type of team that because their coordinators are getting interviewed, if they want to hold on to them, they'd fire Marvin Lewis to promote him from internally.
Mm-hmm.
That would make sense to me as something that Mike Brown would do, but going out and getting a veteran coach would be something that I'm sure Bengals fans would welcome. A guy like Sean Payton might have been a good option if they would have tried to trade with the Saints. That could work.
Second round tender.
Tom Coughlin could absolutely work. The only problem is it's going to take a year to overturn the defense with all the knuckleheads that they got on that side of the ball. So they'd be committing a lot of draft picks and a lot of free agent money to that defense. And if you want to go the former coach / analyst route, I know John Gruden did it once, but that could be a possibility if they wanted to make a change. But it might be a situation where you call up your former nemesis. You call up Bill Cowher and say, what's it going to take? What is it going to take for you to come lead my team to a Super Bowl?
Make it a quick last stand, right? Like you'd be looking at somebody to come in who it wouldn't be a 5-year rebuild plan. It would be a 1 or 2 years, come in, win the Super Bowl, right off into the sunset. That would be the situation.
Yeah. And he's inheriting a playoff team, so he'd be able to figure out what pieces needed to be added that could get them to the big dance. I tell you what, A.J. McCarron, I know he's not the long-term answer because Andy Dalton's getting paid a whole lot of money, but he was 2 stupid penalties away from doing what Dalton had 4 cracks to do and couldn't get done.
Yeah,
so
that's true.
That stock just went up, which means that if the Bengals elect to ship him or shop him, rather, he could get some decent return for them, and that could be very enticing as well for a potential candidate to replace Marvin Lewis. Even though Brown said that they're not interested in doing that, I still would leave open the possibility that it would happen.
Definitely. You're listening to The Doghouse, your inside look at the Cleveland Browns. Andy McNamara alongside Matt Fleur-Jancic. Get us on Twitter at AndyMC81, at Matt Fleur-Jancic. So our Twitter question today on the show, enough playoff football, folks. Browns aren't in the playoffs, no surprise there. But our Doghouse question is, which Browns coaching candidate do you like best so far? Hugh Jackson, Matt Patricia from the Patriots, Jackson, of course, the OC from Cincinnati, or other? At AndyMC81, at Matt Fleur-Jancic. We'll get to your responses in the Doghouse, or rather in the Bark-Off a little bit later on. So, Matt, let's roll through who the Browns have interviewed to this point. Cincinnati offensive coordinator, Hugh Jackson. You have Sean McDermott, defensive coordinator from the Carolina Panthers. They had a great year. Matt Patricia from the New England Patriots, their defensive coordinator. Dallas secondary coach Jerome Henderson. Jacksonville assistant head coach, offensive line coach, former Buffalo Bills head coach Doug Marrone. Detroit defensive coordinator Terrell Austin, and now Adam Gase, who just signed with the Miami Dolphins as their head coach. So we take Gase off the table, Matt. But you made an interesting point before we went on. With Adam Gase, what is the distinguishing factor in his job title, in his powers in Miami, that it was impossible under this Brown structure for him to get here?
He gets control of his own roster.
Boom.
He's a head coach. He's a cook that goes to pick his groceries before he has to make a 4-course meal.
Makes a lot of sense, doesn't it?
You'd think, right?
Makes a lot of sense. Instead, Sashi Brown.
this team is destined to hire another first-time head coach, former coordinator dude that's been, bantered about back and forth. They're never going to get elite talent if they can't figure out the structure. And Joe Banner had final control over the roster, and they got Rob Chudzinski, who is their 8th option. Now, Chud was a damn good football coach.
I like Chud. He got a raw deal.
You're not going to do better than a first-time head coach, former coordinator guy if you keep making the same mistakes.
Mm-hmm. It's true.
And remember, when Pettin was hired, Joe Banner was still in charge, and then they kind of turned the reins over to Ray Farmer, but the structure of the organization was so stupid and how they reported that it was impossible for two guys to be on the same page because the general manager didn't want the head coach, and the head coach knew the general manager was a joke.
And in the end, they're both fired. So, Matt, out of the options that the Browns have interviewed so far, if you had to pick from that pool, who would you want? Take out realism for a minute if that's a factor. But who out of that group, who would you want?
Well, Gase and Henderson are both gone. Henderson actually took a job with Gase in Miami,
that's right.
So that's another name off the list.
Yes, as a coordinator, yeah.
I could look and say, well, this guy had a great season, or his defense had a great season. From a consistency standpoint, I'm looking at a Patriots coach. I'm looking at Patricia, but truthfully, and I cannot believe me of all people are saying this because I was a very big critic of his in Denver, but I feel like you learned some things. I would prefer Josh McDaniels, but you're not going to get him because this is not a very good situation for him, and he would like some input on his roster. But if you want consistency and guys who have done it for long periods of time and know how to get the best out of their players, I'm going with Matt Patricia.
Now, okay, so I'll say mine here. And again, at AndyMC81, at Matt Fleur-Jancic on Twitter. We'll get to your choices in the Barkov a little bit later on. I'm going Hugh Jackson, Matt. I'm going Hugh Jackson. He is my number one candidate out of those that the Browns have interviewed, at least that we know they've interviewed to this point. I like Hugh Jackson because, one, knows the division. That's very important. Knows how tough the division is, has played for a rival, has been in a winning culture, and also had 1 year experience as a head coach before with the Oakland Raiders, where he did and at that point in 2011, remember, the Raiders were completely dysfunctional. He did okay. He did a pretty good job. Terrell Pryor knows him, said Hugh Jackson's a bad dude. Love him. Hugh Jackson. 8-8
with a bad Raiders team.
Matt, would you not take 8-8 as a Browns fan? It'd be the best.
Yeah, it would.
It'd be the best record since 2007. Come on, Hugh Jackson has head coaching experience. One, boom. So we don't get a guy who's coming in raw and has never done it before, even if it was just for 1 year. We get that. We get somebody who knows the division. We get somebody who has run a successful offense. Now, you can argue, okay, the Cincinnati Bengals are stacked with weapons. 100% true. Maybe, though, with him as head coach and with the new process of analytics in the committee, they will realize and not take the Ray Farmer approach of 5 feet tall receivers and get him some weapons. So I like Hugh Jackson for that reason. Matt, my concern with Matt Patricia, and it's nothing against Patricia, but it is something against the Belichick coaching tree. All failures. Now, Bill O'Brien I guess he got to the playoffs in a terrible division with the Houston Texans, but his ultimate success is yet to be determined. We've had Romeo Crennel, former Pats coordinator, 10-6 season, but didn't make the playoffs the one good year. Eric Mangini, Jets head coach and former Belichick coordinator. I just don't trust the Belichick coaching tree because everything goes through Bill and everybody just runs his vision. And then when it seems that they leave, they don't have their own vision.
Well, it's a very good point. Very, very valid point. Very valid argument that the guys that come off that tree generally don't have a whole hell of a lot of success. And you'd be right. This isn't the Mike Holmgren tree where guys like Andy Reid, John Gruden, Steve Mariucci all had a chunk of success. Actually, Andy Reid's still having some success. So it's a completely different model set up for it. I think Mike was a little bit more trusting of his assistant coaches, and Bill was basically a little bit more of a control to control it in terms of if something's going wrong, he's gonna swoop in and save the day type. That goes to his maybe lack of trust in other people, but also his knowledge of the fact that if you rely too much on other people, you might be dusting off the old resume here in the not so distant future. So I think that's where his line of thinking comes from. So I completely understand you. The problem is I just don't think that the Browns with their current structure, and this is where realism comes into play, are going to be able to land that top candidate. I just don't. And they didn't. They whiffed on Gase now for a second time. And you look at the offers out there, the Giants, the Eagles, or the Giants, the Eagles, the 49ers, the Bucks, all of them are in much, much better shape, with the exception of the Niners, but They have history on their side. And I think that's ultimately going to be the situation that leads the Browns to hiring their sixth option and another first-time head coach.
You put it exactly right. And the difference is if you take the 53-man roster off the table, if you just take it out immediately, that puts a top candidate on the edge. I don't even know if I want to talk to these guys. At least if it's on the table, you can say, okay, well, there's a collab. And the Browns can try to spin it with a collaboration, whatever. But the fact of the matter is, the final say goes to Sashi Brown, whether it's collaboration, whatever. It just seems so muddled that there's so many layers you have to get to for decision-making that why would a head coach who is worth his salt, is a top candidate, want to come into a situation like that compared to a place where he can use that as a negotiation tool. And in Miami, they say, yeah, okay, hey, you got 53-man. And he can do his own thing and live and die by his own hand rather than being handcuffed by a committee.
A committee that doesn't necessarily know football. You're talking about a business guy and a baseball analytics guy mixed with an owner who spent a few years in Pittsburgh but had next to no say in anything. So I'm looking at this going,
and his wife.
I'm a coach candidate. I'm very, very nervous about taking a Browns job because A, I know I'm only going to get 2 years before I get the axe, and B, I'm going to have to listen to a football business guy, a contract negotiator, and a baseball analytics guy when it comes to picking players. I'm not going to do that.
Matt, it sounds like a bad joke. A baseball analytics guy, a lawyer, and an owner walk into a bar. Right? That's where we're at.
And they end up firing their football coach 2 years later. That's the punchline.
That is the recurring punchline, unfortunately. It's an old joke. So you're right. So the only way I see a Matt Patricia or Hugh Jackson coming, and Jackson interviewed with the 49ers, is if after the interview the other teams don't offer them the job and they don't want to return back to their old clubs. Because you said on last week's show very correctly, players or coaching candidates have turned down positions to take less money to go back to more stable coordinator positions and wait till the next year for coaching candidates, like Adam Gase did. He
waited 2 years.
He waited 2 years.
If you're in a stable environment and you get offered a job, but it's not a stable environment, you're going to think twice. Believe me when I tell you, you will think twice. I've had opportunities to leave other places before my current place, and I thought long and hard about it. And stability was very important, and it's important to these guys when they're moving their families across the country and they're taking a hell of a risk with their career. They want to know that they're going to be there for a while. They want security. They want stability, and the Browns cannot offer either because they're looking for their fourth coach since Jimmy Haslam bought the team in October of 2012.
Yeah, and then the phantom GM position that will come up, which is really, Matt, just going to be a glorified director of player personnel. Let's call it what it is.
Senior scout is what I've been calling it. So you're doing the same thing. It's the same position.
So you're not so you already eliminate such a huge chunk of top guys. Why would someone like Elliott Wolf, Ron Wolf's son, Hall of Famer, leave the Green Bay Packers to make really a lateral move except for job title? There's no.
Well,
reason.
They don't have to let him interview based off of the structure of the Browns organization and the way they said they're lining it up. The Browns